Many history books begin in the late 15th century, with a lone Portuguese ship emerging from a heavy fog. This is the traditional start of the narrative, where Vasco da Gama discovered India, mapping an unknown land for the very first time. In reality, India had functioned as a highly advanced cosmopolitan center of global trade for centuries. Its cities were already integrated into a vast economic network that connected East Africa, the Middle East, and China. The region produced the world's most sought-after commodities. Markets were filled with fine silks and an abundance of aromatic spices, peppercorns, cinnamon, and cardamom, that were valued as highly as precious metals. This 15th century map represents the specific limits of the European worldview at the time. The distortion and missing landmasses illustrate that Europe was geographically isolated, cut off from a sophisticated global economy it was only beginning to perceive. By the late 1400s, Europe faced a severe economic crisis. Arab merchants maintained absolute control over the land-based Silk Road routes, allowing them to dictate spice prices that often exceeded the value of gold. Seeking to break this monopoly, King Manuel I of Portugal authorized a high-risk maritime expedition. He selected a navigator named Vasco da Gama to lead a fleet into the unmapped waters of the southern Atlantic. Preparation for the voyage took months. 4 ships, the São Gabriel, São Rafael, Berrio, and a supply vessel, were packed with salt-preserved meats and hard bread, intended to sustain the crew through an unprecedented test of physical endurance. Establishing a direct sea route to India was the only path to economic stability for the Portuguese crown. This voyage was a strategic necessity, aimed at ensuring the kingdom's survival in a changing global market. The fleet departed in July 1497, immediately encountering the brutal reality of open ocean travel. Sailing without accurate maps created a sense of constant psychological terror as the ships ventured further into the unknown. The physical toll on the crew was immense. Scurvy caused teeth to loosen and gums to rot, while recurring fevers and the threat of mutiny became more dangerous with every passing week at sea. They eventually reached the southern tip of Africa, a place sailors called the Cape of Storms. Here, the ships were forced to navigate mountain-sized swells and unpredictable winds that had claimed hundreds of vessels before them. Da Gama's persistence pushed the fleet past the Cape, proving that the Atlantic and Indian Oceans were connected. However, while they had survived the passage, the crew remained entirely unaware of the specific routes required to reach the Indian coast. After rounding the Cape, the fleet reached Malindi on the East African coast. Here, they were effectively stranded, as the Portuguese lacked any knowledge of the Indian Ocean's complex seasonal currents. Their situation changed when they met Ahmad ibn Majid, a legendary Arab navigator. Ibn Majid possessed decades of experience sailing the direct routes between the African coast and the Indian subcontinent. Using sophisticated instruments like this brass astrolabe, Ibn Majid taught the Europeans the secrets of celestial navigation and the timing of the monsoon winds. These were scientific principles that Eastern sailors had mastered centuries earlier. The successful crossing was the result of a transfer of knowledge. Da Gama reached India by utilizing the established maritime science of the East, relying on the expertise of local navigators to bridge the final gap. On May 20, 1498, the Portuguese fleet anchored at the port of Calicut. They entered a dense, international trade hub characterized by sophisticated coastal architecture and an established maritime infrastructure. The battered, salt-stained Portuguese sailors stepped into a highly organized urban society. Calicut was a cosmopolitan center where merchants from across the globe conducted business in a stable, structured environment. Da Gama was granted an audience with the Zamorin, the city's ruler. The Portuguese were surprised to find that items they considered priceless luxuries, like cinnamon and fine silk, were treated as routine commodities in the Indian markets. This arrival established a permanent maritime link between East and West. While it successfully broke the existing trade monopoly, it also brought a wealthy and established civilization into the path of European territorial ambition. The initial trade agreements in Calicut were short-lived. Once the wealth of India became clear to European monarchs, the focus shifted from mutual cooperation to aggressive commercial dominance. Multiple European powers soon followed da Gama's route, establishing fortified coastal trade outposts. Over the following decades, these interests transformed into a campaign for total control. Foreign corporations moved inland, claiming authority over India's governance, markets, and labor to fuel industrial growth. This era left a complex and painful legacy. A single voyage intended to secure a trade route resulted in the systemic exploitation of one of the world's most prosperous regions for nearly 300 years. Throughout centuries of colonial rule and economic drain, the Indian subcontinent maintained its cultural identity, persisting through an era defined by foreign governance and suppression. This foreign control ended on August 15, 1947. The world met a sovereign, independent India, reclaimed by its people after generations of struggle. India remains an enduring cultural idea. It is a civilization that exists independently of the maps drawn by those who sought to conquer it, or the boundaries established by those who arrived by sea. While colonial powers sought to control the physical land, the core of a civilization remains beyond the reach of any empire. Long after the invaders depart, these enduring ideas continue to shape and illuminate the world.